The first time Elias left the box outside the nursing home, it was still warm. Snow fell softly on the roof. His footprints, neat and deliberate, vanished quickly behind him. No note, no explanation. Just a plain cardboard box tied with twine, filled with leftover pastries from his quiet cafe on the edge of the mountain. He never told anyone, never waited to see who opened it. The ritual became his only rhythm, once a week, always in silence. And for 5 years no one asked, and he never stopped. Until one day, the box didn't come. Not that week, not the next. Inside the nursing home, a nurse opened a letter addressed to the cafe, signed by a woman who had already died. In it, a name, a story, and a final act that no one, especially Elias, could have foreseen. But what he does next, no one understands it. Not at first. Stay with this story because in the end, what he chooses to build with her gift is something far more valuable than the money she left behind, and it may change how you think about kindness forever. Snow fell in soft sheets against the fogged-up windows of the cafe, muffling the world beyond into a gentle white hush. The wind, sharp and breathless, rattled the door handle now and then, but inside everything was still, almost too still. It was mid-afternoon and not a single customer had entered since noon. Ezra Tanaka stood behind the counter, one hand absent-mindedly wiping the same spot on the wooden surface he'd sanded and lacquered himself 10 winters ago. His grey sweater was speckled with flour, his apron tied tightly around his waist like armor. At 49, Ezra had the stooped shoulders of a man who'd carried too many empty hours, but his eyes, dark observant, missed nothing. The bell above the door didn't ring. He glanced at the clock. 2:41 p.m. The postman had come and gone. That meant it was time. He took the last tray of pastries, apple scones, some almond croissants, a cinnamon braid, and packed them neatly into the old paper boxes he kept beneath the counter. Each one was wrapped in parchment, tucked with a handwritten note that simply read, "For you. Hope today is better." Ezra had never signed the notes. He bundled the boxes into a thick brown mail sack, cinched it closed, and carried it out back his boots, crunching into the snow. The village post office sat 2 blocks downhill. He never asked how the mailman delivered perishables or why they never returned. He didn't care. The destination was always the same Rosepine Elder Care. The pastries had started as a whim, 6 years ago. One winter evening when the cafe had closed with nearly a dozen unsold turnovers, and he couldn't bear to throw them out. He'd remembered his grandmother's last years in a nursing home, how often she'd complained about bland food and even blander company. So he mailed them, anonymously. Then he did it again and again, every few days, every week, for years. Ezra returned to the empty cafe, flicked on the small radio, and stood in the kitchen listening to static until it found an old jazz station. The trumpet notes danced like ghosts through the narrow hallways of the building. Just as he turned to sweep the floor, the bell finally rang. A teenage boy stepped in, hood up, hands in pockets, eyes downcast. Ezra didn't recognize him, but that wasn't rare. Kids came through the village now and then, either tourist children or the occasional lost soul seeking silence. "Something warm?" Ezra asked gently. The boy nodded. "Something with cinnamon." Ezra nodded back and slid a cinnamon twist onto a plate, poured a cup of black coffee beside it. The boy took it to the corner booth without a word. Ezra returned to the counter but watched subtly as the kid ate. He didn't speak, didn't look up, but he finished every crumb. And when he left, he slipped a folded piece of paper beneath the empty plate. Ezra waited until the door closed and the wind howled again before walking over. He unfolded the note. It read in messy pen, "Thanks. Reminded me of something good." That night he packed extra for the nursing home. The next few days followed the same rhythm. A flurry of snow, empty mornings, 1 or 2 quiet patrons. Ezra's movements were habitual, careful, almost ritualistic. The pastries in the mail, the sweeping, the jazz on low volume, until Friday, when the delivery was refused. The mailbag returned unopened. The cafe's name scrawled across the label in shaky pen. Ezra frowned. He opened the bag and found resting atop the pastries a single white envelope. It was addressed to him. He hadn't seen his own name in that handwriting in... No, he had never seen it before. He opened it. Inside, to Mr. Tanaka from a former resident of Rosepine Eldercare. The letter was simple. The woman, her name was Marion Cole, had received his pastries for years, had eaten them slowly, always with tea, said they reminded her of being young and alive, of mornings in her own kitchen with her husband before he died in 79. She had passed away weeks ago, but before she did, she changed her will. She left the remainder of her small inheritance, 46,000, to the anonymous baker, who reminded me life can still taste sweet. Ezra sat with the letter in both hands. It was written in delicate cursive, shaky but proud. He read it twice, then again. The cafe's walls suddenly felt tighter. The register still hadn't rung once that day. He looked out the window. The snow had returned heavier, now thick flakes like feathers tumbling. Ezra didn't move for almost an hour, just sat with the letter in his lap, the pastries beside him, the radio still playing. When he finally rose, he pulled out the small box beneath the counter, the one with his grandmother's photo, slipped the letter beneath it. He didn't think about the money. Not yet. That night, he didn't mail any pastries. A week passed. The cafe remained open, but no deliveries went out. The boy came back, this time with a friend. They whispered in the corner, eyes flitting toward Ezra now and then. They left without a note. But the next day, a woman in her 60s entered with a cane and a smile. She didn't order, just placed a folded paper on the counter and said, "You're the one, aren't you?" Ezra blinked. "Sorry." She tapped the paper. "That woman, Marion. My aunt. She always told us the pastries were magic. You kept her going." Ezra didn't answer. She gave a nod, soft and respectful, and left. Ezra opened the note. It was a photo. Marion Cole, silver-haired and bright-eyed, holding a croissant with both hands like it was made of gold. Behind her, a group of other elders, smiling, laughing, holding pastries, laughing too hard, some pretending to feed each other. On the back, "One last thank you. You fed more than stomach, sir." Ezra stared at the photo until the jazz ended. It began with the smallest shift. Ezra, who for years had barely registered the faces of his customers beyond polite nods and short exchanges, now started noticing details. A red scarf worn too many days in a row, a young mother's tired eyes, and her son's nervous chewing. A quiet man who always read the obituaries before ordering black coffee. These things had always been there. But now Ezra watched like someone who had been called out of a long sleep. The pastries, for the moment, stayed local. He started giving them to customers who looked like they needed them but wouldn't ask. No charge. Just slid across the counter with the same words he'd once written on notes. "Hope today is better." Most just blinked. Some nodded grateful. One or two cried. No one ever refused. But the weight of Marion's letter still hung in the air of the cafe like a ghost that didn't want to leave. One evening, a woman appeared. She was in her early 50s, bundled in a long olive coat, a knitted hat pulled low over her ears. Her cheeks were red from the wind, but her posture was sharp controlled. She stepped into the cafe as if she'd been here before, even though Ezra was sure he'd never seen her. She didn't order right away, just walked to the shelf of baked goods, scanning them slowly, eyes lingering on the almond tarts. Ezra waited. Finally, she turned to the counter. "Which one's your favorite?" He looked at the display, unsure. He hadn't been asked that in years. "Depends on the day." She smiled just barely. "Today, then." He hesitated. "The raspberry pinwheel. It's tart. Doesn't pretend to be sweet unless it wants to be." She laughed at that. Not loudly, but real. He packed one carefully and passed it across. She sat in the corner booth next to the window and took small bites, like she was memorizing the taste. After 15 minutes, she returned to the counter. "This is going to sound odd," she said, voice low. "But do you know if someone named Marion Cole used to come here?" Ezra stiffened. The woman noticed. Her expression softened. "She was my mother. I found some notes, mentions of this place. The pastries. I think she figured out who you were near the end." He cleared his throat. "She never came in. Just sent the letter. I figured." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. "She wrote this one, too. I wasn't going to bring it. Thought it might be too much. But after tasting that—" She paused. "She wanted you to have it, and I wanted to say thank you myself." Ezra accepted the envelope, but didn't open it. Not yet. "Do you run this place alone?" she asked. He nodded. She looked around, then back at him. "Ever thought about doing something more?" He raised an eyebrow. "More? I don't know. Something permanent. Something beyond just food." She glanced again at the quiet tables. "People come here, not just for coffee. I can feel it." Ezra said nothing. He didn't know what to say. She smiled again. "I'm staying in the village a few days. If you want to talk more, I'll be around." She gestured toward the pinwheel. "And I'll definitely be back for more of these." He watched her leave. For the first time in weeks, the cafe felt warm. That night, after closing, Ezra opened the envelope. It wasn't a letter. It was a sketch. Pencil on faded stationery. A garden. Winding paths between wildflowers. Small stone benches. A sign that read, "The Quiet Place," underneath in looping cursive. "If you ever build this, I hope someone finds peace there, like I found in your pastries." Ezra stared at the drawing long into the night. The next morning he walked behind the cafe, past the fence, past the broken crates he hadn't cleared in years, and stared at the frozen patch of earth no one ever looked at. There was room, more than enough room, and for the first time since the letter arrived, he knew what he wanted to do. He began clearing it that afternoon, alone, shovel in hand, cold cutting through his gloves, one wooden crate at a time, one rock, one root. His back ached, his arms trembled, but he kept going. Words spread slowly. First, through the mailman who noticed Ezra no longer bringing boxes. Then, through the teenagers who whispered about the old guy digging behind the cafe. Then, through Marion's daughter, who began stopping by every morning bringing him thermoses of hot tea and silent company. Soon the regulars noticed. One left a bag of bulbs, another offered to build a bench. By the end of the second week, there was a path. By the third, a gate. Ezra never asked for help, but he didn't turn it away either. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the sky turned orange gold, Ezra stood in the center of the garden-to-be. The ground was still rough. The flowers hadn't bloomed, but the shape was there. The promise. Marion's sketch rested in his coat pocket. He could almost hear her voice. "If you ever build this," he smiled just barely. Then he returned to the cafe and started the oven. That night he baked raspberry pinwheels. Just enough for tomorrow. By early spring, the garden had a name. It wasn't Ezra who named it. One of the high school students, a quiet girl with large glasses who always studied alone in the back, left a note pinned to the new wooden gate. Marion's Garden. The name stayed. No one questioned it. No one dared change it. It suited the space. The flowers were still sparse, but already bees had begun to drift in from the trees beyond. Someone had brought in wind chimes, soft and low-toned, swaying gently from a bent willow branch. Ezra built a small arch at the entrance, just like the one in Marion's sketch, and painted it a dusty blue. The cafe, once a quiet tomb of flower and radio jazz, began to breathe. People came, some just to walk through the garden, others to sit and cry quietly on the benches. A few, mostly elderly, came in pairs and stayed for hours sipping tea and watching the wind move through the grass like it was telling stories. Ezra never said much. He didn't need to. His pastries spoke for him, but something in him had changed too. His shoulders didn't stoop quite as much. His voice, still soft, had less weariness in it. There were new items on the menu. Simple things, seasonal things, but they carried something more than flavor. Each seemed crafted not just with skill, but with memory, and memory had become the heart of everything. One day, as Ezra arranged scones on a tray, the teenage boy from winter returned. This time he walked with purpose. No hood, no hunched posture. He wore a clean shirt tucked into his jeans, and his eyes were clearer than Ezra remembered. He placed a folded note on the counter before speaking. "I wanted to say thank you, and to give you this." Ezra took the note. "You don't have to. It's not a thank you letter," the boy interrupted. "It's a recipe. From my mum. Before she passed, she used to make these lemon shortbreads. I hadn't thought about them in years. Until I came here. Thought maybe you'd know what to do with it. Ezra nodded slowly, unfolding the paper. The handwriting was shaky but precise. The boy paused before leaving. You should know. People talk about this place. The garden, the food. You're helping people. You helped me. Ezra opened his mouth, then closed it. The boy smiled. That's okay. You don't have to say anything. He left, letting the bell chime once behind him. Ezra looked down at the recipe, then turned toward the kitchen. A few weeks later, the lemon shortbreads made their quiet debut. No sign, no promotion. Just a few placed gently in a ceramic bowl beside the coffee machine with a simple card. Try one. By the end of the day, they were gone. Ezra kept making them. That spring saw the return of Marion's daughter now, with paint-stained jeans and a determined look in her eye. I have an idea, she said after sitting through a croissant and tea. The garden's beautiful, but I think we can take it further. My mum, she always believed in growing beyond our boundaries. Ezra listened. She pulled out a notebook and laid it flat. Inside, sketches, plans for a community table, a small stage for poetry readings or music, raised planters for herbs and vegetables that anyone could take. I know it's a lot, she said, softer now, but I think it's what she would have wanted. And I think it's what this place is becoming. Ezra didn't reply right away. He traced the edge of the drawing with one finger quietly. Then he nodded. I'll need more flour, he said simply. She laughed. The work began again. This time not alone. Over the next month, more people volunteered. Someone donated lumber. A retired carpenter offered his hands. A teenage girl painted signs with flowers curling around the letters. The community table took shape beneath the arch. Planters were filled, chairs were mended. The space became more than a garden. It became a memory shared. One Sunday afternoon, long after the cafe had closed for the day, Ezra stepped into the garden alone. The air was thick with scent, lavender warm soil, the faint sugar left on the breeze from the cafe's open windows. The wind chimes played a slow, broken lullaby. He sat on a bench near the center, next to the path of smooth river stones someone had laid. In his hands, Marion's original letter, folded, worn at the edges, still intact. He didn't read it this time. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled from his coat pocket a notebook, one he'd only recently started, and opened to the first page. Marion's garden cookbook, Memories in Butter and Flour. He'd decided to write it. Not for profit, not for fame. Just to preserve what had been born in this tiny place, the recipes, yes, but also the stories behind each one. Marion's croissants, the boys' lemon shortbreads, the raspberry pinwheels, all of them. The cafe had been a way to survive. This garden, this community, it had become a way to live. Ezra breathed in the quiet. Somewhere behind him, a small group of kids laughed as they played near the herbs. One called out about worms, another about tomatoes. He smiled. Then he opened to a blank page and began writing the next recipe. Summer arrived in full bloom. The garden was no longer a patch of potential. It was alive, rich, wild, yet somehow orderly. Bees danced from bloom to bloom. The herbs, rosemary, thyme, mint, had grown so full that Ezra started adding them fresh to his bakes. The cafe's back door remained propped open most days, and the scent of pastries drifted out into the garden like an invitation. People had stopped calling it just a cafe. They now said, let's meet at Marion's, like it was a person or a home. The change surprised Ezra. He'd never named the cafe, never needed to. But hearing it called Marion's didn't sting. It felt right, like a tribute that had formed naturally without force. And with the change came something else letters. Dozens of them. Some slipped under the door, others mailed from towns he'd never heard of. A few even came hand-delivered, tucked in coat pockets or wrapped around bouquets. They were from strangers, people who had heard about the garden, the bakery, the man who made pastries for grief. They shared stories of lost mothers, broken friendships, dreams deferred. Some just said, thank you. Ezra kept everyone. He didn't respond, but he read them all. One morning, as the first light filtered through the front window, a young man stepped into the cafe. He had paint on his jeans and a guitar case on his back. Ezra recognized him immediately. It was the boy who had once knocked over a rack of croissants and fled in embarrassment years ago. He looked different now, taller, calmer. I heard about the place, he said, smiling. Didn't think you'd still remember me. Ezra shrugged. You broke my croissant rack. Hard to forget. The boy laughed. He ordered tea, then hesitated at the counter. You mind if I play out back sometime? Just acoustic. Nothing loud. I've been writing songs and I think they'd sound right in the garden. Ezra considered, then nodded. Wednesday afternoons? After the rush. It became a tradition. Every Wednesday, the boy, now called Julian, played for a small crowd that gathered naturally. His voice was soft but certain, and his lyrics always centered on healing, on silence, on memory blended with the breeze like prayer. Sometimes Marian's daughter sat in the garden during the song sketching. Other times, the teenage girl who'd first named the garden read poetry aloud between sets. The place had grown into something Ezra could never have predicted. But it was still grounded in the same thing, simple, intentional care. Every item on the menu now had a name beside it, not for branding, but as tribute. The lemon shortbreads were Eli's cookies, the raspberry pinwheels, Hope tarts. The croissants remained Marian's. One morning, as Ezra placed a tray of Marian's into the display, he paused. The edges weren't perfect, a little uneven, a touch too golden on one side. Years ago, he'd have scrapped the batch and started again. But now he just smiled, because he knew whoever bit into them wasn't looking for perfection. They were looking for presence. That evening after closing, Ezra did something he hadn't done in a long, long time. He took out his father's old Polaroid camera, the one that had sat on the top shelf gathering dust since the day the bakery opened. He stepped into the garden at dusk and started taking photos. He captured the curved stone bench under the lavender, the mosaic tiles someone had inlaid on the garden path, the painted signs hanging from the planter boxes, each one etched with names for Ruth, for Daniel, for Mom. Each click of the shutter felt like a heartbeat. Later, back inside, he laid the photos across the counter, one by one. Soft edges, slightly faded tones, tangible proof of what had grown from silence. Then, with gentle hands, he began pasting them into the notebook, the cookbook, the one he'd started months ago and now nearly filled. The final section was still blank. Ezra stared at it, unsure what to call it. Then, slowly, he wrote at the top of the page, things that cannot be baked. He left it empty, on purpose, because not everything needed a recipe. Some things like grief, like healing, like forgiveness had to be felt, lived, grown in silence and sunlight, like flowers that bloom when no one is watching. The first anniversary of the garden's creation came quietly. There was no grand event, no posters, no announcements. Ezra simply placed a small handwritten note on the garden gate that morning. It read, "You are standing in something love built." People came, not all at once, but in waves. Familiar faces, new ones. Parents with children, teens with sketchbooks, an old man who always brought his own folding chair and sat for hours beneath the birch tree without saying a word. Marian's daughter brought a single croissant, wrapped in linen, and placed it at the base of the willow arch. Julian sang. His voice had grown steadier over the months, but it still carried that same quiet ache Ezra had first noticed. By afternoon, the garden was full, not crowded, just full, of warmth, of presence, of people letting their shoulders drop, their hands rest. It was the kind of gathering that didn't need speeches or applause. Ezra stayed behind the counter most of the day, watching, listening, baking. There was something sacred about doing what he always did, especially on a day like this. Later that evening, when the light stretched long and gold across the floorboards, Marian's daughter stopped by the counter. Her cheeks were flushed eyes misty, but smiling. "You know," she said, "my mom used to say gardens are the only place where grief feels like it's allowed to breathe." Ezra nodded. She placed something on the counter. A small wooden frame. Inside, a photo, faded black and white, of Marian. Young flower on her cheek, laughing with a tray of croissants in her hands. Ezra stared at it. "I thought you should have it," she said. "It's where it belongs." He didn't speak, just reached for it carefully, as if it might disappear. That night, after the doors closed and the last chair was turned upside down, Ezra did something he hadn't done in nearly 2 years. He sat down in the center of the garden in the moonlight, alone. He rested Marion's photo beside him, then opened the cookbook. The last section still bore the same heading, Things That Cannot Be Baked. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without a word, he wrote beneath it, But they can be grown. He didn't cry, but his chest ached in that sweet, familiar way, like something healing deeper than words. Ezra closed the book, leaned back against the bench, listened to the night sounds, the hum of crickets, the creak of branches, the soft echo of wind chimes. Somewhere inside the cafe, a timer went off, faint and forgotten. A reminder that the dough needed tending. He smiled, because that too was life. Have you ever built something beautiful out of pain? Something quiet but lasting? Sometimes the things we plant in our hardest seasons end up feeding others in ways we never expected. If this story reminded you of someone you've lost or a place that helped you heal, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, feel free to subscribe, and gently tap the bell. Thanks for staying till the end. Take care of yourself. See you in the next one.